When Darksiders was first released, I knew I needed to go out and get it. A game where you can play as one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, slaying demons and running around on a destroyed Earth? Sign me up! So I can say that I spent a lot of time playing this game and was not disappointed often. But before I get ahead of myself, like I tend to get on the verge of doing most times, let me elaborate on the story a bit. You play as War, who is summoned to the planet as asteroids rain to the ground. Hell looks to have invaded, and angels from heaven are attempting to fight them off to claim the world as their own. War is not a member of either faction, so they'll both attack if they spot you. Humans will be running in sheer panic. It won't take more than a simple strike to slay them, if you choose to do so. The Earth begins falling apart, and eventually War comes up against a beast known as Straga. Although War is on the verge of killing it, he eventually falls due to losing his powers, and is promptly defeated. He wakes up at the sight of the Council, a small group of beings that seems to oversee the Horsemen. They condemn him because they claim he was never summoned to Earth, saying that the seals that would have to be broken were never destroyed. At least, one wasn't. So War volunteers to head out to the now barren world to find out who's responsible. As he puts it, if he fails, the Council's punishment would have been carried out anyway. At the start, War is only equipped with the Chaos Eater, his trusty sword. He lost every other power that he had in his apprehension by the Council. His only ally, if you want to call it that, is the Watcher, a being that is tasked to watch the Horseman and make sure he doesn't do anything funny. You might think that he sounds a bit like the Joker from the Arkham games, and that's because he's voiced by Mark Hamill. Interesting pick, but it sounds appropriate when you hear his voice each time. In a nutshell, the game as a whole feels like a mix of Legend of Zelda and God of War. As I review the game, you'll probably see what I mean by its similarities. I'll try to point things out as I come across them. Anyway, back to the gameplay. War gets to swing around his massive sword, slaying anything that comes in his way. Eventually, you can find two other weapons. One is a scythe that can be bought from a demon named Vulgrim, who makes regular appearances to fulfill the merchant role, along with allowing you to travel between areas through something called a serpent hole. The other weapon is the Tremor Gauntlet. It's easy enough to switch between these two secondary weapons. You just press down on the directional pad. Basically, the sword is always mapped to the square button, and the secondary weapon will always strike when pressing triangle. X jumps and circle is your action button. L2 functions as your lock-on, although I'll get to why you shouldn't rely on that so much in a bit. L1 allows you to bring up your item bar, where you can put shortcuts to items and skills. Finally, R1 is your defend and evade button. I should probably talk about the combat, as honestly, it's the biggest problem with the game, if you really want to call it a problem. Yes, it's simple enough to perform combos when each weapon has its own button, and that's it. And the combat itself isn't so bad. It's more so the non-attack aspects of the combat that irk me a bit. For one, L2 locks onto a specific enemy, but the camera is often far too zoomed in. If the battle is a one-on-one bout, you don't have to fret so much. But if there's other enemies surrounding you, you may not see them until they're mid-strike, and by then it'll be too late anyway. So you're better off not using the lock-on until wiping out the easier of the enemies, and then maybe focusing on that team. The camera as a whole can also just be frustrating to work with at times. When you get into close confines and then get pushed to a wall, you can lose all sense of awareness. Granted, if you're fighting in a large open area, that's not so bad. The other main problem with the combat is that it just feels stiff overall, and it's mostly because of the ways that War has to defend himself. The only way that you can block enemy attacks, and only the weaker varieties, is to stand perfectly still and hit R1 to block. You can counter attacks if you hit R1 precisely at impact, but other than that, it's just based off of standing still and reading attacks. If you're moving in any direction, pressing R1 will have War dash, attempting to completely avoid the attack. But here's the problem. There's a noticeable delay at the end of each dash. This means that you might be able to evade one attack, but then get stuck against another one since you can't move for that second after the dash. It's a shame because these defensive maneuvers are absolutely required to survive in Darksiders. Thankfully, it's something that you'll eventually get used to, but it's still annoying to have to deal with it. There is something that helps alleviate the stress of defeating the more difficult enemies: the ending kills. After dealing enough damage to an enemy, you may see the circle pop up above them, similar to God of War games. By pressing this when in their vicinity, you'll instantly kill them, and typically get bonus health or wrath from their corpse. If you're grinding for regular souls, which act as the game's currency, you may want to just keep attacking the enemies to finish them off normally. It can be a bit riskier, but it's your choice overall. So Wrath. That's basically your magical abilities. Those yellow bars under your status signify how much Wrath you have. Most attacks use up at least one bar, and it normally will not regenerate on its own. There's only 4 different Wrath abilities that you can unlock, and the Blade Geyser is yours right from the start. Honestly, it's one of the few attacks I used. On a later playthrough to get more trophies, I unlocked the Affliction ability, which was actually even more powerful. Oops. The other 2 abilities I can say I never used, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, these Wrath powers can be extremely useful in a pinch, but I wouldn't recommend relying on them, as for most of the bosses, you'll have to rely on regular attacks since they won't be standing still long enough to be hit with a Wrath attack. But at the same time, you'll want to use them when needed, because they can save your ass every once in a while. The game is definitely not easy, due to those quirks I mentioned about a minute ago. There's no easy way to regain your life, other than the life chests that appear sporadically. There's no health up ability. There's only a very small select few of enemies that will relinquish those coveted green souls. So you'll have to be very wary in combat to not get overly aggressive and take off more life than you need to. At least when you die, you do get about half of your health back. That's at least something that's positive, because you'll probably collapse a lot. So let's move on from the combat into the other things you can do. The world isn't extremely open, but there's enough exploring that you're allowed to perform, which you should, because there are quite a few collectibles that you can come across. There are plenty of life and Wrathstone fragments that you can find that will increase your maximum values, and in typical Legend of Zelda fashion, 4 fragments will make a whole. There are various artifacts that can be traded for Vulgrim for souls. Several relics can be found and attached to your weapons to give them different attributes, like more weapon XP, more power, health leeching, or my favorite, automatic Wrath regeneration. There are, I think, 8 regular relics, and then 4 super powerful ones named after each of the horsemen that are a bit more out of the way. The odd thing is that in the final parts of the game, you'll be tasked to put together the ultimate sword to be able to defeat the final villain. But once you do, you can't attach any relics to it. It's a bit strange and disappointing, but considering how powerful it is, I guess you really don't need one on it. As you progress through the game, you'll have to go through several areas that resemble Zelda's dungeons. You can find maps in them, and a relic that shows you all the chests in an area. There are only a few keys that you'll need to procure, and each dungeon has a special item that you can find. The only thing really missing is the compass, and that's because the boss is already shown on the map screen. So let's compare items. You can find the crossblade in the first dungeon, which just so happens to act like a boomerang. There's some bomb plants, which the reference is pretty obvious. You can find Ruin, War's horse, and he has a stamina meter just like Epona. And finally, there's the Abyssal Chain, which functions identically to the hookshot. And hell, while we're talking about similarities, how about the Watcher, who acts a bit like Navi? Navi? Am I getting it right? I can't remember, it's been a while since I played Ocarina of Time. But anyway, instead of hearing the annoying, "Hey, listen," you'll hear "over here." Close enough. You even get a portal gun in the last dungeon, called the Void Walker. It can be a bit wonky to use at times, because I know in one of the mini-boss battles, portals weren't appearing where they should have, but overall, it works nicely. But you'll still be glad when that dungeon is over, because the puzzles can be maddening to figure out. So how about the atmosphere and environment that you're forced to trudge through? Well, it's simply fantastic. There's a feeling of dread throughout the entire world. Buildings have collapsed, roads have cracked, bridges torn down. And yet there's some bright areas, like where the armorer Ulthane resides, complete with sparkling water, colorful grass, and lively birds. It's a stark contrast to the rest of the world. It's something that helps keep you enthralled and wanting to proceed onwards. The story helps too. Right from the beginning, you want to keep playing to see what lays in War's path. You want to see what actually happened when he was summoned to Earth. And I can say that once you defeat the final demon, the ending is worthwhile. I won't spoil it, but I will say that I enjoyed it. I will also say that if you're going to be going after that awesome Platinum Trophy, you'll have to do a bit of grinding. Weapons level up slowly, even with the Combat Lore artifact. The worst is the Tremor Gauntlet, since it's so damn slow to use. Oh well. I ended up achieving it anyway after another go-round on the hardest difficulty, which, honestly, I didn't find to be as challenging as I was expecting. Sure, some enemies would take out multiple life bars with a single hit, but that happened on normal too. Darksiders is a really, really fun game that may play just like Legend of Zelda and God of War, but really, who cares? If you're going to copy from the best, right? Lots of stuff to purchase and find. Overall fun combat, although with a few flaws. And an engrossing world that just has you wanting more. I just started playing Darksiders 2 where you play as Death, trying to exonerate his brother. I'm liking it so far, but I'm only about an hour or so in. Everything seems so much smoother though, so I guess we'll see. And I just heard rumors that Darksiders 3 might be in the works. So if that's the case, I'll be excited to play this one, since the series seems to have so much potential. But again, definitely give this one a shot if you enjoy Legend of Zelda or the combat of God of War. Final score? 9 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.